Kelsey. This is my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I'm wearing one of my fancy booktube hats, and today I'm bringing you a double review video of two middle grade books that were released last year in 2017. I would really like to be doing full reviews of more new middle grade releases, so here we are. These are specifically both middle grade fantasy books. And the first one of these two is going to be Carmer and Grit Book 1, The Wing Snatchers by Sarah Jean Horwitz, and the second is going to be The Glass Town Game by Catherynne Valente. So diving right in with The Wing Snatchers, this is a promising start to a new series from a debut author. I picked it up for a number of elements that intrigued me, even though I had some trepidation about others. There's stage magic meets real magic. There's whimsical steampunk fantasy world building. And how could a book with mechanical cats on the cover possibly go wrong? But I was worried that the fairies in this were going to be disappointing to me. With an inches tall, one-winged fairy princess as one of the protagonists, would we just be getting watered down Tinkerbell and Flower Fairy types? So while I must report that the mechanical cats were surprisingly underwhelming, I was pleased to find that there's plenty of genuine, fresh magic and real fae lore in Horwitz's writing to make up for it, though the book is not without its flaws. Carmer is a young boy with a mind for mechanics and invention apprenticed to the Amazifier, an illusionist whose once illustrious career is on its last legs. The Amazifier and crew have one last shot at glory, a grand contest in the thrilling industrialized city of Scamantis, a chance for the best and brightest stage magicians to show their stuff. But in the Arboretum of Scamantis, the Seelie Fae are facing a mysterious threat to their existence and way of life. And when Carmer's path crosses by chance with a rebellious fairy princess who insists on being called Grit, her real name is Greta Frida, the unlikely pair may be the only ones who can save the day. Unfortunately, Grit's role as a rebel fairy princess and her relationship with her queenly mother were never more than color by number. She's such a stereotypical YA protagonist watered down for middle grade readers that it's almost cringeworthy. She's different because she was born with only one wing, and so she can't fly or make fairy dust, and she resents how it leaves her ostracized amongst the fae, but she's also definitely probably very, very special. She doesn't want to be the pretty princess that her mother tries to make her be, and sneaks off whenever she can to hang out with the rough street fae. It's all a little much, and a little shallow. And I felt the same about her relationship with Carmer when it hits some snags that play out and are resolved in incredibly predictable ways. It seems like Grit's feelings about having only one wing were meant to be commentary on disability, but I don't think that her storyline as a whole was strong enough for that to make much of an impact. I could identify much more strongly with Carmer's mundane insecurities and strengths than I could with Grit, so it's something of a relief that we actually spend much more time over the course of the narrative in his head than we do in hers. But just because Grit is underwhelming as a character doesn't mean that Horwitz's fae and their world are trite or uninteresting as a whole. I have to applaud how she uses the child-friendly image of fairies as a middle-grade appropriate facade, while gradually rolling out a lot of genuine fae folklore knowledge underneath. She has got what it takes to write both the beauty and the peril of fairy, and I shouldn't have doubted. By the time we finally get a taste of the Unseelie court near the end of the book, well, I will let you discover that for yourselves. I am a sucker for stories where stage magic and real magic collide, and this is another area where I was impressed with Horwitz's descriptive writing skill. There are a few scenes that feel a little bit like the night circus for younger readers, and they are lovely. My final quibble, however, is with an aspect of the world building that I think could have easily been avoided. See, Scamantis seems like a completely fictional city in a completely fictional world, but there are a couple of brief references to the fact that this is supposed to be the east coast of North America. As a fictional world, it's wonderfully envisioned, but as an alternate history, it's woefully underdeveloped. It's possible that Scamantis is supposed to be an alternate 19th century New York City, with the Arboretum as a fantastical version of Central Park. But why? It makes even less sense when you consider that the Fae are presented as beings of the natural world forced into retreat by humanity's expansion and industrialization. But they are decidedly European-style Fae, so what are they doing in America? I will definitely be reading the second book in this series, which has already been released, which promises to delve more deeply into the world of the Unseelie Court. My hopes going forward are that 1. Grit will become a more interesting and less annoying character, and 2. that Horwitz's choice to make her fantasy world an alternate history North America will be justified. When I finished this book, I initially wavered and gave it 4 stars, but thinking about it a little more and comparing it to other middle grade books that I've recently given 4 stars, I decided that it would be more prudent to bump it down to a 3, but this is still definitely a 3 where I'm planning on continuing on with the series. And so the other book that I am reviewing today, The Glass Town Game, is one of those 4-star middle grade recent reads for me. While The Wing Snatchers was Horwitz's debut, The Glass Town Game is far, 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 far from being Valente's, so I think that in comparison between these 2 books, Valente's experience really does show. But it also meant that I was inevitably going to be comparing this new middle grade portal fantasy to Valente's Fairyland books, which are all-time favorites of mine. So in case you're wondering, the short verdict is, it's insightful, wildly clever, magical, and complex. But The Glass Town Game doesn't quite strike that deep universal chord for me that The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making and its sequels do. Perhaps because this book is a little denser to pick apart and a little slower to come together. The Glass Town Game is longer than any of the Fairyland books. It is a standalone, and it is based on the childhoods of actual historical figures. The build-up is a little lengthy, and it takes a while to begin to see the shape of it. Why, I was asking for some time, are the Bronte children going on a Valente-style portal fantasy adventure? It's not like they went on to write Alice in Wonderland when they grew up. You see, when Charlotte, Emily, Anne, and Branwell Bronte board an obviously magical train to Glasstown, it's clear both that they've stumbled into something that they somehow created, and that it's not at all how they imagined it. Glasstown is a game they play with their toy soldiers at home, pitting the armies of Bonaparte and Wellington against each other in a war between Glasstown and Gondal. But here, Valente doesn't hold back on her traditional fantastical landscapes and characters. Not only are the Bronte children's toy soldiers living and breathing, but all the people they meet are constructed of odd materials, and perhaps more importantly, all turns of phrase seem to be literal. So Napoleon, known as Boney, is literally made of bones. Sailors known as limeys are made out of limes, and you drink from a champagne flute by playing music upon it. This world is populated by historical figures that the Bronte children might have plausibly included in their games, but in Glasstown they are different from their real-world equivalents, based on the children's perceptions of them and on the strange, wild rules of this world that both is and isn't theirs. But though it seems like a beautiful, shiny adventure, this is a story that is defined and shaped by grief, hardship, and loss. When our story begins, Charlotte and Emily are dreading returning to school. Not because homework will curtail their free time or because they're nervous about making new friends, but because conditions at schools for girls like them were so terrible that their 2 older sisters literally fell ill and died. Given this, along with the earlier loss of their mother, the children now feel like their family is incomplete and about to be pulled apart even further. Charlotte is straining under the pressure of being the oldest when she wasn't before, and Branwell is also stifled by the expectations riding on his shoulders as his father's only son. He is driven by the need to prove himself worthier than his sisters and his inability to accept when they outshine him. See, he doesn't have to go away to school to suffer starvation, abuse, and illness like his sisters, but he takes his privilege for granted. He loves his sisters, and he's a confused child, so he can't be held entirely at fault for how toxic masculinity drives his actions. But Valente uses his character to deliver an unflinching look at how boys can be and have been taught to devalue women. But back to the story, when the children find themselves in Glasstown's war zone, they discover that the Glasstowners are in possession of a substance that they call grog, which brings the dead back to life. This makes sense given that toy soldiers die many times and go on to fight again. The children begin to wonder if they could smuggle grog back to their world to bring their loved ones back, but soon they're wrapped up in the strategy, espionage, and reasons behind the war between Glasstown and Gondal. This world may not seem real to them, but it is the real world for the people who live in it, and so their actions have real consequences. This is a book that demands more from the reader than I'm used to seeing in middle grade, which shouldn't surprise me since Valente has never been one to write down to younger readers. But I would guess that lots of the historical and literary references will be lost on kids, who are unlikely to have read anything by the Brontes or learned much about the Napoleonic Wars. Heck, I felt like I was probably missing clever nods right and left. But how much does that really matter? Certainly a good deal of the payoff comes from knowledge of what Charlotte, Emily, and Anne would go on to achieve in their lives. But even without, there's still plenty of vivid imagery and excitement to spark the imagination, and it's still a moving story about a family healing from loss and finding confidence in the power of their own stories. Who knows, those stories might even give life to new worlds. So the Glasstown game was a 4-star read for me. This is the sort of middle grade that I do feel really confident recommending to adult readers, and strangely feel a little less confident recommending it to actual kids. I do think this would be a great book, though, for parents to read with their children, especially if those parents have knowledge of some of the historical and literary references, so they could talk about it. I think that might be the ultimate reading experience for this. So those are my 2 middle grade books that I was reviewing today. Let me know if you've read either of these or if you're planning to. Let me know what you think. Anyhow, I hope you're having a nice day. That is all. Bye for now.